of scientific findings. So I'm very well aware of the fact that what I've been saying is very programmatic, and actually it is the kind of program that I myself am committed to and working on. I've been trying to say that science is not one thing, that science is characterized by certain limitations, and that the claim that science calls for a drastic reformation or actually abandonment of Christian faith, that case can only be made when one somehow neglects or plays down the importance of the kinds of limits that I've been trying to point towards. Thank you very much.
Okay, again, we'll break for just 2 or 3 minutes and then we'll assemble for questions. Okay, we're going to begin with the questions now. Professor van Woudenberg has asked me to keep track of people who would like to ask questions, and so I will recognize you, and then you can direct your question to René.
Yes?
With regards relating to your remark about chance, and that there are probably many different things that are made by chance, right? And that the step from it's all chance to there's no meaning to life is a big one. Right? I wanted to suggest maybe this, that I would guess that there's also quite a few meanings to what meaning of life could mean, right? And it is, interestingly, a fact, it seems to me, that many people in history ever since Darwin, or ever especially since this issue with chance has come up, right, have been rather taken aback hearing when they heard about Darwin and when they heard about somehow that chance events plays a role. Doesn't that sort of at least give some evidence that at least some people mean something by meaning of life that is sort of detrimentally affected by whatever chance means or has to do with chance in Darwinian theory? That sort of, that then just to tell them, look, chance means so many different things, meaning of life means so many different things, there's a big step. There seems to be, just by the fact that so many people react that way, or have reacted that way to Darwin, doesn't that by itself at least give some evidence that they might actually be meaning something by chance and by meaning of life that actually are in opposition to each other?
Well, intuitively, there's something right about what you're saying, but it seems to me that when you really take a close look at what biologists, when they use chance and chance mutation, what they really mean by it, I've only pointed to one way in which biologists are talking about chance occurrences or chance mutations. I know of at least 2 other ways they have explained it. When you take a look at that, and then look to these great pronouncements on the point of life or anything of the sort, then I get sort of bewildered, and it seems as a philosopher, right, we should be sensitive to the very different ways in which, or to different uses, the same words are put. So I also know, and you will know that as well, that from the simple fact that Einstein called his theory the theory of general and special relativity, very many people have derived all sorts of moral consequences, and they thought there was some sort of scientific evidence for moral relativism or of the sort. Of course, Einstein himself said, well, that's simply an appropriation of the word, and it seems to me that something like that is going on here as well.
René, so one place I got nervous was when you were sort of at least sketching the rough notion of scientific knowledge you had in play. Right, so scientific knowledge equals true belief warranted in a way that involves scientific research. I think you unpacked that in about 3 different ways. And I think it affects your claims about limitations of scientific knowledge. So here's 3 different things you might mean by that. Maybe scientific knowledge is true belief warranted in a way that exclusively involves scientific research. Maybe it's that it partly, at least partly involves scientific research. And the third was when you talked about that, well, it could at least in principle involve exclusively scientific research. It may, in fact, have other things in it. Now, which of those you mean, I think, does affect the claims you make about the limits of science. Because I'm thinking that, especially on the more inclusive readings, right, where scientific research could provide part of the warrant or be a part of the warrant story. Well, I think you might get something like that on any of the categories where you say science is limited. The other place where it occurred to me, and then I'll stop, is when you got down to the third section, does science call Christianity to change? When you, the first point, to the criticism that science doesn't warrant Christian faith, I was surprised you didn't have a second point saying, well, to some extent it does, because on your more inclusive understanding of scientific knowledge, you included history of all things, right? And you might think at least that, in the same way that you thought it would be legitimate to call it scientific knowledge, were you to read the book about the history of shipbuilding, right? Learning about your grandfather's profession. Well, I mean, a similar, at least a similar route to warrant might be had historically for the Christian faith, if you really mean that to be that inclusive about scientific knowledge. What's going on there?
Yeah, good point. So when I was thinking of scientific knowledge, I was thinking actually of knowledge that the warrant for which is exclusively produced by something that merits the qualification scientific investigation or scientific inquiry, with the further addition as we now know it. I mean, it's an open scientific enterprise is an open-ended enterprise, so we never can say in advance where it's going to lead us to. But as we now know it, I think we should think that if you think of a specific Christian belief, like for instance a belief about atonement or the Trinity, that it's very hard to say that it derives its warrant exclusively from science. And that was so. Now that in the fuller version, I give a more discussion about it related to the case about my great-grandfather who was a shipbuilder. Now suppose I knew already from the familial testimony that he was a shipbuilder, but then I hit upon this book. Is the knowledge that I have, does it qualify as scientific or as extra scientific or both, or what's going on there? So that's an interesting point. Yeah.
Just a brief follow-up. So having clarified that you mean that the warrant comes exclusively from scientific research, could you give an example of some actual scientific knowledge where we take the warrant to come exclusively from scientific research, so that the warrant isn't even partly a function of background assumptions, background beliefs? I mean, partly this dovetails nicely with your criticisms about the limits of science, right? Oh no, there are assumptions in place. There are extra scientific assumptions about theory, choice, etc. But I am a little worried if your understanding of scientific knowledge is such that, well, there isn't any of it at present.
Yeah. Well, so I was thinking all sorts of things said in elementary physics. Well, these seems to be of a highly theoretical nature that don't derive in any direct sense from perception. But that's another thing that's relevant to, or I try to address that in the very first point when I said science is a vague concept. What counts as scientific, that isn't very easy to say, and therefore what I'm going to say about the limits of science, that's also sort of a hazardous enterprise. So I was relying there on sort of, hopefully, proper functioning ability to cope with vague concepts. But it is actually a bit. It's a very good point. Yeah.
I don't think that there are many people, in fact, I can't really think of any people who would say that all knowledge is scientific knowledge as you've defined it. But there are a lot of people who would say, at least they wouldn't say that carefully speaking, there are a lot of people who would say that the methods of science are the only sources of knowledge. And they might say very loosely speaking that science is the measure of what is that it is, and what is not that it is not. But by that they would mean the methods of science are the fundamental sources of knowledge. And the methods of science will let in a lot that you're wanting to set on the side of limits. So things like logical reasoning and things like that. And a lot of these folks too will say, really what we're most concerned about is insisting on the fact that beliefs about what exists need to be warranted by science. Beliefs about the laws of logic or things like that. Maybe those are scientific only in a very loose sense, if at all. Maybe they're just beliefs about conceptual truths. Okay, maybe those aren't scientific. But they're really concerned to say that if you want to make existence claims, you have to appeal to science somehow. And so I wonder what you would say to those folks. There's a whole lot that they'll be happy to give up on too. So you say there's moral knowledge, but some of these folks will say, well, not really. You say, well, we know the laws of nature, but some of these folks, von Frosten, for example, will say, well, not really. I mean, there aren't laws of nature exactly, or not the way you would think of them, or whatever. So what would you say to these folks?
Right. So, I mean, this is the what you wind up with in a very programmatic kind of talk. So, I mean, there are emotivists. They would deny there is such a thing as moral knowledge, and they would deny the existence of moral fact. So I'm committed to to some form of moral realism, and it actually falls out, so to speak, out of the program that I've been sketching here. That's something I'm committed to, and I feel assured in this by, so to speak, by common sense. Very many people would think surely there are some things are in a robust sense are morally wrong to do. There are and other things are in a robust sense morally appropriate and morally good to do. And all these explanations away, and there are also internal problems. It seems to me with emotivist and other moral anti-realist views. So what I've been saying commits me to a critical stance towards those people. But, given the nature of the kind of thing that I've been saying, I haven't really made an argument against these people. They would simply say, well, René, now you've got to start working and try to convince me of the fact that there really are moral facts, because that was such an important linchpin in your argument for the existence of extra scientific, even irreducibly extra scientific knowledge. And so that's where and that's all correct. Yeah.